Now, as far as war is concerned, there are few theories with regard to ethics of war. The first theory is pacifism. Okay. Pacifism. So, pacifism opposes war at any cost. Pacifism opposes war at any cost. Okay. So basically, the pacifists believe that a war is always wrong. A war cannot be ethically justified under any circumstance. Okay. Who are the examples of pacifists? Gandhi. Okay. Ashoka, yeah, after the Kalika War. Okay, Martin Luther King Jr., etc. Okay. Erasmus, there was a Dutch philosopher called Erasmus. Okay, he was also a pacifist. Okay, in fact, Erasmus said that the cost of war is so great that even if you win, you lose much more than you gain. Okay, so these people basically opposed war at any cost. They said that any dispute should be resolved through peaceful means, through negotiations, through discussions, through economic sanctions, etc. Like a war should not be resorted to at any cost. Now, what is the problem with pacifism? Again, it's very difficult to implement in practice because there are certain situations, there are certain circumstances where war is the only option left. For example, the Second World War. Okay, a Second World War was needed to stop Hitler and to stop the Nazis. Hitler could not have been negotiated with. He wouldn't have listened to discussions, deliberations, negotiations, or sanctions. War was the only option that was available for the Allied forces. Okay, so pacifism, theoretically it sounds good, but it is very difficult to implement in practice. Again, on the other end of the spectrum, we have amoral realism. Amoral realism. Amoral realism believes that a war is not only legitimate, but morality does not constrain war. But morality does not constrain war. Okay, so basically they promote war. They in fact glorify war. They not just promote war, but they glorify war. Okay. Now within amoral realists there are two categories of people. Okay. The first category of people promote war basically for expansionist purpose. Okay. For achieving geopolitical objectives. The second category of people basically promote religious war. Okay. So amoral realists are of two kinds. Those who promote and glorify war for achieving geopolitical objectives for expansionist purpose, and those who promote and glorify war for achieving religious ends. Okay. For example, Islamic fundamentalism. Okay. So again, these are two ends of the spectrum. On one end we have pacifism, on the other end we have amoral realism. These are two extreme theories. Okay. So again, like always, the correct path is the middle path. So we have something called just war theory. So just war theory says that a war can be ethically justified under certain circumstances if certain conditions are followed. A war can be ethically justified if certain conditions are followed. Now these conditions are of three kinds, or these principles are of three kinds. governing the conduct of war or principles governing resorting to war at first place. पहला, the first set of principles क्या है? Principles governing resorting to war at first place. Second, principles governing conduct of war. Principles governing conduct of war. And third, principles governing termination of war. Principles governing termination of war and signing of peace agreements. Okay, so let us discuss these principles one by one. पहला क्या है? Principles which should be used to resort to war at first place. है ना? कि before starting a war, what are the principles that should be followed? First, just cause. Okay, just cause means that there has to be a just cause to start a war. For example, for self-defense or for protecting innocent people from genocide, okay, or from ethnic cleansing, or for protection of human rights. Okay. Second, right intention. Right intention. Right intention means intention should not be malafide. Intention of starting a war should not be malafide. For example, a war should not be fought for territorial gains or for revenge. Okay. Next, proper authority and public declaration. Proper authority and public declaration. So basically this means that due process should be followed before starting a war. So competent authority should declare the war. Which is the competent authority in the international context? Which is sanctioned to UNSC, United Nations Security Council. Fourth, last resort. So war should be used only when all other alternatives have been exhausted. Discussions, deliberations, negotiations, economic sanctions, everything has been used, then only war should be the last resort. And last, proportionality. Lastly, we have proportionality. Proportionality means that a war should be started only if the perceived benefits outweigh the perceived costs. If the proper cost benefit analysis needs to be carried out. Next, principles governing the conduct of war. These were principles which are to be followed before starting a war. Second is principles governing the conduct of war. एक बार war start हो गया है, then what are the principles that should be followed? First, obeying all treaties and conventions. Obeying all international treaties and conventions. We have various international treaties and conventions. For example, Chemical Weapons Convention, Biological Weapons Convention. Okay, these international treaties and conventions should be followed in letter and spirit. Next, non-combatant immunity. Non-combatant immunity. Who are non-combatants? Civilians. Okay, who do not fight the war. Okay, so civilians should not be harmed during the war. Civilians should be protected. They should have immunity. Okay. Next, benevolent quarantine of prisoners of war, POWs. Benevolent quarantine exchange of POWs. POWs, business of war. Okay, so during a war, POWs should not be physically or mentally tortured. They should be quarantined. Quarantine का क्या मतलब होता है? Isolated. Okay, जो भी POWs capture होंगे, all the POWs who are captured during a war, they should be quarantined, they should be isolated, they should be treated in a benevolent fashion. Okay, they should not be physically or mentally tortured. And at the end of the war, they should be exchanged. Exchange of POWs take place. Okay, after a war ends. Okay. Next, proportionality. So proportionality means that disproportionate use of force should not be used. Okay, if something can be achieved using traditional methods, using conventional weapons, then weapons of mass destruction should not be used. Okay. And lastly, evil methods such as mass plunder, mass rape campaigns, evil methods such as mass plunder, mass rape campaigns, ethnic cleansing, etc. should not be used during the war. Should not be used during the war. Okay. So, evil methods, mass plunder, you understand plunder? Plunder? They do, because there is, when a war happens, the rule of law gets broken down. Okay. For example, when wars happen in West Asia, okay, mass plunder, like the criminal elements, they make use of the vacuum that exists. There is no rule of law, there is no monitoring agency, there is no regulatory body, there is no government there. Okay, then they indulge in mass plunder campaign. हर जगह जाकर they basically लूटपाट, they go, they indulge in robbery, theft, etc. Similarly, mass rape campaigns also take place during a war. Ethnic cleansing takes place. Ethnic cleansing means basically killing like people of a particular community. Okay. So these things are very common. But again, as per the just war theory, these things should not be resorted to during the war. Okay. Next, principles governing the termination of war and signing of peace agreements. First, the peace agreement should be reasonable and moderate. It should be reasonable and moderate. It should not be vindictive. It should not be vindictive. Okay. So basically, it should not be revengeful, the peace agreement. For example, Treaty of Versailles, it was a vindictive treaty. It was a vindictive peace agreement that was signed after World War I. Okay. So peace agreement should not be signed with that objective. Second, the agreement should make a distinction between leaders and soldiers of the defeated nation, between leaders and soldiers of the defeated nation and civilians. Sweeping socio-economic sanctions that affect civilians should be avoided. that affect civilians should be avoided. Okay, so a distinction should be made between leaders and soldiers who are responsible for the war, who are involved in the war, and civilians. Okay. Next, it should focus on rehabilitation and reconstruction of the defeated nation. It should focus on rehabilitation and reconstruction of the defeated nation, and should try to remedy the wrongs that led to the war at first place. And should try to remedy the wrongs that led to the war at first place. Okay, so you should try to address the root causes that led to the war, and should focus on rehabilitation and reconstruction and development of the defeated nation. Finally, leaders or soldiers responsible for war crimes leaders or soldiers responsible for war crimes should be tried in an objective manner. Okay? So, trials for war crimes should take place in an objective manner. Okay? Recently, in which country trial for war crimes were taking place? Bangladesh. Okay. And because of that, there was a lot of instability, political unrest in Bangladesh. Okay. Mass ethnic cleansing. But in Bangladesh, what was taking place? It was an internal trial that was taking place. It wasn't an international. Next, so this is basically just for theory. So if these conditions are followed, if these principles are followed before starting a war, during conduct of the war, and after end of the war, after termination of the war, then a war can be ethically justified. Okay, so if you get a question on ethics of war, you have to write the just war theory. Okay. Then on क्या है issue यहाँ पर quality security related issues में we have ethics of drone attacks. Ethical issues in drone attacks. We have already discussed this. Ethics of drone attacks. Okay. And then we were discussing acts of double effects. There I told you there are certain principles. If those principles are followed, then the drone attack can be ethically justified. Which was the major principle that is violated in drone attack? When we were discussing acts of double effects, one principle out of 4 principles, 3 were being followed. There was one principle which was being violated. Yeah, the good effect must not be obtained through evil effect. We should be able to isolate the good effect and the evil effect. So if civilian casualty is taking place, if it is inevitable, then this principle was violated. And what was another issue with drone attack apart from civilian casualties? Asymmetric warfare. Okay. So if ethics of drone attacks, basically you have to analyze from the point of view of 2 things: asymmetric warfare and civilian casualty. Okay. Then the third thing that we have to discuss here is ethics of R2P. R2P we have discussed. What is R2P? What is the full form of R2P? Yes. R2P क्या है? सुना है कभी? हार्ड टू राइट नहीं, responsibility. Okay, responsibility to protect. It's a United Nations Security Council resolution. Okay, whereby global community has the responsibility to protect or has the responsibility to intervene militarily in some other country if ethnic cleansing, mass genocide, etc. are taking place. Okay. Now, what are the ethical issues involved in foreign military interventions? You have heard of foreign military interventions? Okay. In the last few decades, there have been so many foreign military interventions and coercive regime changes. And through these foreign military interventions, the existing regimes have been changed forcefully. Okay, coercively. So, what are the ethical issues in foreign military interventions and in coercive regime changes? Okay, the main issue is that it's a violation of the sovereignty of the country where military intervention is taking place. Okay, and international affairs is based on sovereign equality of all nations. Okay, irrespective of their size, status, etc. At the same time, there are certain situations, there are certain circumstances where foreign military intervention becomes inevitable. Okay. So basically, if a question comes on foreign military intervention, you have to use the principles of just war. Because foreign military intervention is another form of war only. So if those principles that we have discussed as part of just war theory, if those principles are found in foreign military interventions, then foreign military intervention can be ethically justified. Okay, तो just war theory ही यहाँ पे लिखना है. Okay, can you think of examples? What are the examples of military interventions which can be ethically justified and which cannot be ethically justified? First of all, military interventions which can be ethically justified. Myanmar, what military interventions? Korean crisis. There was no foreign military intervention as such. There was foreign arbitration. They were sort of negotiating a peace deal. There was no like military interventions. Afghanistan. It's a grey. For example, again, Second World War, you can give the example. Okay, it was a form of foreign military intervention. It was a form of foreign war. Okay, to basically stop the rise of Nazis. Apart from that, India's military intervention in East Pakistan, Bangladesh Liberation War, 1971. Okay, again it is considered to be an example of ethical military intervention.
Is the military intervention in Kashmir in the Indonesian case?
Pakistan military intervention is ethically justified.
No, not justified.
We are discussing examples of where it can be ethically justified.
First, the North Korea extended the DMZ, and again with the support of US, the South Korea that.
But there was, see, that was basically a conflict between North and South Korea, in which Soviet Union was supporting North Korea and US and basically other NATO allies were supporting South Korea. Okay, but they did not actively sort of invaded each other. Okay, we are talking of active military interventions. Okay, वैसे तो support तो all the Cold War conflicts they had either the support of either Soviet Union group or US state bloc. Okay, so that tacit support was there. But when some foreign power actively intervenes militarily, we are talking of those examples.
Intervened in the Iran when the chemical weapons were used.
Who intervened?
USA and UK. There was third
Yes. So the Iran-Iraq war or even the Kuwait war, Okay. There the intervention took place by the Western countries, US, UK and few of the other NATO allies. Okay. It was ethically justified. Okay, because most of the conditions of just war were being followed. Similarly, India's military intervention in Maldives also. India has intervened militarily in Maldives when
Operations. This was the
Operation Cactus.
Operation Cactus in 1988. Okay. So again, it is considered to be an example of ethical military intervention because India did not have any geopolitical objective there. Okay. There, the dictator of Maldives at that time had sought Indian support, had sought India's military support. Okay. Similarly, foreign military intervention of NATO in Yugoslavia. When an ethnic war was taking place between the Croats and the Serbs, Croatia and Serbia, which were earlier part of Yugoslavia. Okay. So again, that is considered to be ethically justified. Okay. So all these are examples. India's involvement in Bangladesh, in Maldives, Second World War, Yugoslavia. Second World War is a war. It's not a foreign military intervention. Yugoslavia, NATO's military intervention in Yugoslavia. Okay, all these are examples of foreign military interventions that can be ethically justified. Okay. Afghanistan is a grey. Okay. Afghanistan, what is the reason that the US gives? Why is it? Terrorism. But terrorism existed even before 2001 also. Okay. So the US started thinking about terrorism when it was attacked. So again, the intention. One of the principles of just war is right intention. What was the intention? So its intention can be questioned. Now, what are the examples where such interventions cannot be ethically justified? Iraq. Iraq is a very good example of an unethical, unjustified foreign military intervention. So, why did the US intervene in Iraq?
Nuclear weapon is developing nuclear arsenal.
Yeah. So USA basically accused that Saddam Hussein or Iraq is developing weapons of mass destruction. Okay. However, no weapons of mass destruction were found. In fact, Iraq war is considered to be the beginning of the time period which led to instability in West Asia. Before that, West Asia was a relatively stable region. Iraq war changed everything. Okay. In fact, even rise of ISIS can be traced to Iraq war. Because of Iraq war, it led to Shia-Sunni conflict, etc., and which ultimately led to the rise of ISIS. Okay. Even Syria cannot be ethically justified. Okay. You have no basically sort of justification to intervene there. Okay. But US is doing it because the regime there had become unfriendly to the US. Even we recently, Russia's annexation of Crimea. That is also an example of unethical foreign military intervention. Okay. So again, if any question comes on the ethical issues or the ethics of such foreign military interventions, first of all write the theory part, just what theory will your principles and then give examples. Okay. Those examples where such interventions can be justified, those examples where they cannot be ethically justified. Okay? Now, economy or finance related issues. Isme the first thing is ethics of international aid conditionalities. I have discussed international aid conditionality in the orientation. I think I have discussed what are international aid conditionalities. Okay. Make them liable in imposing conditions. Okay. That we will give you loan or aid only if you follow certain conditions. For example, our economic reforms that took place. It was part of the international conditionalities imposed by IMF. Okay. Similarly, presently World Bank funds a lot of development projects, World Bank, UNDP, etc. And they have their own, for example, World Bank has its own environmental and social framework, which is to be followed for all projects which have been funded by World Bank. Okay. Now, what is the issue with what are the ethical issues in international conditionality? What are the issues here?
They are helping us.
They are helping us. Okay. Unsustainable tech. Okay. So basically, you will have to highlight both the sides of the picture. To what extent imposing conditionalities can be ethically justified, and to what extent or what are the reasons why imposing conditions cannot be ethically justified. Okay. So let us discuss first why they can be ethically justified imposing conditions, or why why they cannot be ethically justified. What are the issues? Unsustainable debt is one, he said, or sovereignty. It's a violation of our economic sovereignty. Okay, imposing conditions. You are being forced to introduce certain policy measures which you wouldn't have otherwise done. So basically, the critiques of international conditionality, they say that it is a form of neo-colonialism. It's a new form of economic exploitation. Okay. So I have given you that example of. I told you the name of a book, Confessions of an Economic Hitman. Remember? So again, that book again highlights how the US, by imposing such conditions on developing and underdeveloped countries, in the name of promoting their interest. The US says that this is being done, basically it will help you, but how? It actually benefits its own self-interest. Its multinational corporations are benefited by such conditions. Okay, that is the criticism. What are the arguments for? The first argument is that they are the lenders. They are giving you money. Okay, so it's perfectly fine for lenders to impose conditions. If you do not want to follow the conditions, don't take the money. It's as simple as that. Nobody is forcing you to take the money. You are taking money from them because you need their money. Okay, and if they are giving you money, then it's perfectly ethical on their part to impose certain conditions. Okay, that is the first thing. See, as far as 8 conditionalities are there, we should not confuse, or we should not confuse between the argument and the entity that is making the argument. Okay, in philosophy there is a fallacy. हमने शुरू में fallacies पढ़े थे ना? There is a fallacy called fallacy of ad hominem. Fallacy of ad hominem. So fallacy of ad hominem क्या होता है? When you confuse the argument with the entity that is making the argument. So I say that your argument is not correct because I do not like you as a person. Okay. So we should not repeat the same mistake while analyzing international conditionalities. Okay. Just because these conditions are being imposed by some external entity, it does not mean that they are necessarily bad. Are you understanding? Basically, your argument should be, if any question comes on international conditionality, these conditionalities should be assessed on the basis of their merit, whether we are going to benefit, whether the country where the conditionalities are being imposed, whether that country is going to benefit from those conditions or not. It does not matter whether these conditions are being imposed from outside or whether it is being done internally. Okay. For example, when we introduced the new monetary reforms, we did not implement everything that the IMF was telling us. For example, we did not introduce full capital account convertibility. You understand capital account convertibility, current account convertibility, capital account convertibility, पता है? Capital account convertibility just in simple terms basically it relates to like balance of payment. पता है balance of payment? उसका current account होता है, capital account होता है. Okay. Capital account में क्या आता है?
assets.
Physical.
Physical assets.
Not the account of a corporation. I'm talking about of a nation. एक nation का जो balance of payment होता है, ठीक है, उसमें current account होता है, capital account होता है. तो current account में balance of trade हो गया, balance of services हो गया, remittances हो गया, ये सारे आते हैं. Capital account में क्या आता है? Investment and borrowings. These two are part of capital account. ठीक है? Investment and borrowings. So capital account convertibility refers to the ease with which foreign investment and foreign borrowings can take place in an economy. Okay? ये कितना ease के साथ, कितना liberalized investment और borrowing architecture है. For example, जो different FDI limits जो हैं in different sectors, we have different FDI limits. It's part of capital account convertibility. We are slowly moving towards capital account convertibility by liberalizing FDI norms in different sectors. Full capital account convertibility का क्या मतलब होता है? There is 100% FDI is allowed under automatic rule in all the sectors. Now, when you were introducing economic reforms, IMF, like one of the conditions or one of the things that IMF was telling us is to go for full capital account convertibility. Okay, but we did not introduce it under the pressure of IMF. We told that our economy is not ready for full capital account convertibility. We are going to implement it at our own pace, depending upon our own needs and requirements. So we adopted a very phased approach to capital account convertibility. Okay. So again, when we talk of international conditionalities, we should assess whether those conditions are in our interest, are in our long-term interest or not. We should not just oppose it just because it is being imposed by somebody else. We should assess that conditionality on the basis of its merit. Yeah. So we should not commit the fallacy of ad hominem here. Okay. Okay. Ethics of international conditionalities. Then ethical issues in trade negotiations, international trade negotiations. What are the ethical issues in trade negotiations? We have read about WTO and the different aspects of trade negotiations that take place.
They also force the nations to accept the free trade, which may be unfavorable to
Trade negotiations में nobody is forced. If you don't want to be part of WTO, don't be a part of WTO. Nobody is forcing you to be part of WTO or to be part of trade negotiations. It's completely voluntary. So trade negotiations में basically the interests of developing and developed countries are at loggerheads. Okay, there is a conflict of interest of developed and developing countries. Okay, developed countries are more concerned about NAMA, non-agricultural market access. And developing countries, underdeveloped countries, they are more concerned about their agricultural sector. For them, agriculture sector is a very sensitive area, where because of free trade, certain distortions may creep in. Farmers, domestic farmers may be negatively affected. Okay. Similarly, countries such as India, they are more concerned about the service sector also, because India has a very strong service sector. Okay. So there is something called, you have heard of Doha Development Round? Doha Development Round. So Doha Development Round, there are a number of it's a round, like Doha Development Round started way back in the year 2000. It has been more than 18 years, 17, 18 years. Still it has not been concluded. Okay. Why? Because of inherent conflict of interest between developing and developed countries. Recently in 2013, something called Bali package was introduced. WTO meeting took place in Bali, and decisions were taken. Okay. Have you heard about Bali package, peace clause, trade facilitation agreement? Okay. So if you haven't, please go through it. See again, these are not ethics related issues. These are general international affairs related issues, but you have to analyze it from the point of view of ethics. If this question comes in ethics, how will I approach it? What will I write? What are the ethical issues involved? So basically, Bali agreement, it was essentially related to food security and the subsidies that developing countries such as India are giving to their farmers. So as per the WTO norms, the total amount of subsidy, there are different kinds of subsidies. WTO specifies different kinds of subsidies that countries can give. Okay, blue box subsidies, green box subsidies, amber box subsidies, etc. Okay. Now, as per the WTO norms, the total amount of agricultural subsidies should not exceed 10% of the total value of agricultural output. So this is known as AMS, aggregate measure of support. So total AMS, aggregate measure of support, in the agricultural sector should not exceed 10% of the total value of agricultural output. Now in India, because of our public distribution system, okay, the total subsidies that the Indian government is giving to farmers, it is exceeding 10%. And in the developed countries say that it is exceeding. So the few years back, the developed countries wanted us to basically sort of make changes in our PDS program, public distribution system program, so that the AMS comes down to less than 10%. However, India did not agree. India said that food security and farmers' welfare is something that is very sensitive issue and we cannot touch that. So as a middle path, something called peace clause was introduced. Okay, so the developed countries said that they agreed that okay, you continue with your PDS system, your procurement system, your food security system, etc., whatever you have. But in return, they asked for a permanent solution अभी तक नहीं हुआ है. But in return, they asked for a trade facilitation agreement. Okay, trade facilitation agreement basically means developing countries had to give certain commitments with regard to development of their port infrastructure, which would facilitate international trade in terms of their regulatory clearances, etc., at ports, etc. Okay, because one of the grievances of developed countries was that in developing countries the trade infrastructure is very weak. Okay, so developed countries agreed to basically sign a peace clause, which would give developing countries such as India the space and the time to continue with their public distribution system, food procurement system, etc. And in return, developing countries, what did they agree? They agreed to a trade facilitation agreement. Okay, so these are all the issues that are involved in international trade negotiations. Okay, so read about these negotiations, Doha development round, whatever is happening. I think this year again WTO meet is going to take place. Okay. Every 2 years it takes place. In this year or last year? Last year it has taken place. Okay, next. Last year, where did it take place? Brazil. Nairobi was before that. So read about the negotiations, what are the interests and demands of developed countries. Buenos Aires. What are the demands and interests of developing countries, what are the ethical issues involved here. Here the main ethical issue that is involved here is equity and redistributive justice. Okay, so developed countries and developing countries cannot be treated at the same level. Okay, so that's why in all these negotiations, in all these agreements, there are special provisions for developing and underdeveloped countries. So equity and redistributive justice is the main ethical issue. Okay. Similarly, you can also get ethics of IPR, intellectual property rights, ethical issues related to intellectual property rights. In which area IPR has been used in which sector of our economy? Pharmaceutical sector. So, what is the main ethical issue as far as IPR is concerned? Yeah. So basically, what the branded pharma companies they were doing, that they were indulging in evergreening of patents by making incremental innovation. Okay, so they had a patent for say 20 years. After 20 years, what they will do? They will make small tinkering, small changes with their product, and they will again reapply for patent. This is known as evergreening of patents through incremental innovation. Okay, so few years back, the Supreme Court basically struck down this evergreening of patents by introducing the concept of compulsory licensing. Okay, so the Supreme Court said that such evergreening of patents through incremental innovation cannot be allowed. Okay, and the court allowed generic drug manufacturing companies to continue manufacturing these drugs. Okay, the court gave compulsory licensing to these generic drug manufacturing companies in larger public interest. Okay. So again, the grievances or the complaints of developed countries is that India has a weak IPR framework which hampers R&D and innovation. Okay. Whereas developing countries say that health sector is something that is non-negotiable. Okay. In larger public interest, in larger interest of public health, okay, compulsory licensing can be given. In fact, again, which is the WTO agreement which governs IPR? TRIPS, Trade Related Intellectual Property Rights. So, in the TRIPS also there is a provision that of compulsory licensing in larger public interest. So, India is not violating international agreement. Okay, that is India's argument. Okay. So again, you need to realize that the basic conclusion on any question related to IPR would be that IPR is not an end in itself. Intellectual property rights are a means to achieve something. It cannot be an end in itself. Okay. So in larger public interest, IPR needs to be balanced with issues of public interest, public health, etc. Yeah. See again, all these are, I told you that all these are GS related issues. IPR आपको paper 3 में पढ़ना है. But again, whenever you are reading these things, keep in mind the ethical angle. What are the ethical issues? Okay. Now environmental issues.
The recent UAE, the question is mentioned that how far is it justified?
So you just give arguments for, arguments against, and a balanced conclusion. Arguments for receiving the aid, arguments against receiving the aid, and a balanced conclusion. Arguments for होगा कि because it's a calamity situation, resource crunch है, so we should accept any help that is coming from any corner of the world. Okay. But again, earlier India used to take, but our experience has not been good.
2004 was
After the tsunami calamity, we used to take it. I think the safer stance here would be to say that we should not take aid. Because we have the internal resources. Already, see, internally today I was reading that people only have donated more than 700 crore. Through all these online donations and all, more than 700 crore has been collected. That is much more than what UAE was offering. It was offering 600 crore.
So, in the India 600 crore.
it has come with that, and later it's officially we did not announce the government's review.
But that was the news basically, whatever, whether it was correct or not. Okay. So again, see, we have to take a long-term view. Today, we can take the money, no problem. Okay, tomorrow, what will be its implications? Tomorrow, UAE might try to use it for its advantage when we are holding international discussions, negotiations, deliberations on any issue, then this might come up. See, because in international affairs there are no free lunches. Try to understand that. UAE ऐसा भी free में पैसा नहीं देगा. It has some hidden objectives, and there is nothing wrong in it. In international affairs, everybody is concerned about their interests. So UAE would leverage it, would use it at some point or the other. So, keeping in mind a long-term perspective, it is not advisable to take aid from other countries, especially now that we have the resources. Our civil society is so active, civil society has contributed so much. Central government is also giving funds, although the states keep on demanding more. चाहे वो central government कितना भी दे, तो states का काम है demand करना. Okay, but I think we have the resources to deal with such calamities at present. Okay, ethics of climate change. First, environmental issue में the ethical issue here is ethics of climate change. What are the ethical issues in climate change? When climate change negotiations take place, what are the ethical issues that are raised by developing countries, developed countries, etc.? Climate refugees. Okay.
Developed countries are legal.
Developed countries are?
Developed countries argue that development should be sustainable.
Yeah, I think that development should be sustained.
No much resources should be consumed by developing countries. We said,
Okay. Basically, developing countries should adopt the path of sustainable development. That is what developed countries are. और क्या ethical issues हैं?
nobody cares about
Nobody cares about climate change.
No nation cares.
Growth versus
They will think that they will have
sustainability.
Growth versus sustainability is one issue. Okay. How to balance growth related issues with sustainability related issues. और क्या issue है? You have heard of CPDR? CPDR RC क्या है? And respective capabilities. Okay. So this is the like major issue in all climate change negotiations: common but differentiated responsibility and respective capabilities. Okay. So the developing countries say that most of the climate change that has taken place, it has taken place because of developed countries. Okay, it took place because of the industrial revolution and other economic activities that started in developed countries post industrial revolution. Okay, and now when it is our turn to industrialize, when it is our turn to develop, now you are asking us to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, which is not possible and which is not fair also. Okay, because given our developmental needs, if say India is to grow at 9% or 10% per annum, our power, like the demand for power is going to increase exponentially. Okay, and again, if we have to generate that amount of power, that much of power, we have no other option but to use thermal power plants. Okay, so beyond a particular level, it is not just feasible for developing countries to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions given their developmental needs. So that's why developing countries say that the responsibility to deal with climate change, it should be differentiated. Developed countries should have more responsibility as compared to developing countries, because they are the ones who have caused climate change at first place. Okay, so this concept is known as CPDR, common but differentiated responsibility and respective capabilities. Now recently in the Paris Climate Change Agreement, this principle has been replaced. What is the new principle? Paris Climate Change Agreement, you have read? INDCs. Okay, so now CBDR RC has been replaced by INDCs. Although In spirit, they are similar, but the nomenclature has been changed. So INDC stands for Intended Nationally Determined Contributions. So developed countries were saying that till the time countries such as India and China, who are huge greenhouse gas emitters, they also contribute in dealing with climate change. Okay, no substantive results can be achieved. Earlier, what was the framework as part of Kyoto Protocol? You have read about Kyoto Protocol? So earlier, as part of Kyoto Protocol, all the countries were divided into three groups: Annex 1 country, Annexure 1 country, Annexure 2 countries, and non-Annex country. Annexure 1 countries were all the developed countries who had binding targets. They had to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions as compared to a baseline level by a certain percentage. Okay. Non-annexure countries were mostly developing and underdeveloped countries who did not have any binding targets. Now, as part of INDCs, developing countries such as India and China, they have agreed to certain contributions. Although again, they are not legally binding. It's a voluntary determined contribution. Okay, for example, as part of India, what are India's INDCs? As part of our INDCs, India has agreed to reduce our emission intensity of GDP by 33 to 35%. Okay. Then increase the share of renewable energy to 40%. Okay. Create a carbon sink of additional 3 billion ton of CO2 equivalent through afforestation. All these are our INDCs. Okay, so the first issue is this: CBDR, RC and INDCs. Then growth versus sustainability. Okay, how to balance growth related issues with sustainability issues. और क्या ethical issue है?
Green carbon footprint, international surveillance.
Yeah, all these are initiatives to balance growth and sustainability. ISA, Green Finance, REDD plus, REDD. ये सब जितने हैं, these are all international initiatives, international funds to balance, to basically promote sustainable development. Okay, so growth और sustainability वाला जो issue है उसको promote करने के लिए at an international level a number of things have been done. We have sustainable development goals. SDGs have been formulated from 2004, like for the period 2015 to 2030. Okay, International Solar Alliance is there. We have Convention on Biological Diversity, technology transfer, financial transfers. ये सारी चीजें हो रहे हैं to balance growth and sustainability. The third major issue with climate change is intergenerational equity. Okay, the third major ethical issue. Intergenerational equity. How do you define sustainable development? What is the definition of sustainable development?
Future generation.
Development should not be environmental harm without depletion of natural resources, and also maintaining same environment or better environment for the future generations.
Excessive use of, restricting the excessive use of resources taken in view of the future generation.
Yeah. So basically, there was this commission, Earthland Commission. It was set up in the mid 1980s, and it was the first time that sustainable development was defined. And it said that sustainable development refers to a development wherein the present generation satisfies its needs without compromising the ability of the future generation to satisfy their needs. Okay. So basically, there is an equity issue there, intergenerational equity, because the effects of climate change are not seen in the short term. Okay? The effects of climate change will be borne by the future generation. Although we are also seeing the effect of climate change, but the real effect would be seen after 40-50 years if we do not have. And plus, so basically whatever we are going to do now, it is going to benefit us after 40 to 50 years. Okay? The impact takes time to sort of settle in. Okay? So that's why the present generation has very little incentive to act against climate change. Because, first of all, it is not a politically lucrative issue because whatever you do now, its impact is not going to be seen in the next few years. Its impact is going to be seen after a few decades. Okay. So there is no incentive for the present generation to adopt the path of sustainable development so as to leave adequate resources for the future generation. You understand? It's like a party. A party has started and all the people who have come first, they have eaten all the food and nothing is left for the people who are going to come later. So there is an equity issue here, intergenerational equity. Okay. We have to decide what kind of world we want to leave for our children and grandchildren. Okay. And the last ethical issue here is commercialization of pollution. Commercialization of pollution. Now, as part of Kyoto Protocol, there were certain flexibility mechanisms. You have read about flexibility mechanisms under Kyoto Protocol? If, like Annex 1 countries, they had binding targets, if they were not able to fulfill those targets, there were certain flexibility mechanisms that were provided to them. Okay? For example, joint implementation, clean development mechanism. So, as part of, for example, joint implementation, say, if the US is not able to fulfill its greenhouse gas emission target, what it will do? It will invest in some other country in Annex, it will invest in some other Annex 1 country. Okay? And it will reduce greenhouse gas emission there. Similarly, as part of clean development mechanism, some Annex 1 country invests in non-Annex country, developing countries such as India. है ना? वो यहाँ invest करेंगे, यहाँ पर they will reduce the greenhouse gas emission. Okay? So these are known as flexibility mechanisms. Now, what is the issue with these flexibility mechanisms?
Countries will make use of it.
Yeah?
Some countries will make use of it.
It was introduced so that some countries could make use.
So, use of the resources to the population of
Not make use, monetary.
No, monetarily the developing country will also benefit. They are getting investment now. It's not like they are exploiting us. Okay, they have invested here, they have helped us in developing some green technology, and because of that, whatever greenhouse gas emissions have reduced, they will show as part of their. So it's a win-win situation for both. They are also benefiting, we are also benefiting. There is no problem in that.
but their level of pollution and happiness.
Yeah.
There is no change.
Yeah. So basically it leads to commercialization of pollution. So basically what you are saying is that, okay, I am not able to reduce my pollution, I will invest in your country, you reduce your pollution. So through such market mechanisms, through such market instruments, you are basically removing the stigma associated with pollution. Are you understanding? Okay, they are continuing to do that thing, they are just paying monetary through monetary investment. Okay. So again, all the countries have to basically take responsibility. You cannot say that, okay, I am going to give you money and I will continue to pollute. This is commercialization of pollution. Okay. So that is another issue with the manner in which we are dealing with climate change at present. The manner, like issue with the present market mechanisms, flexibility mechanisms, okay, that existed in Kyoto Protocol. So all these are ethical issues in climate change. CBDR, RC, ITDCs, growth versus sustainability, intergenerational equity and commercialization of pollution. Okay? The last topic that we will discuss here is moral roots of India's foreign policy. See, we are done with the applied part. Okay, we discussed various things. We discussed ethics of war, drone attacks, ethics of foreign military interventions, ethics of international conditionalities, IPR related issues, climate change, etc. Again, keep your eyes and ears open. Whenever you are reading anything in IR, you can think from the point of view of ethics also. If this question comes in ethics, either as part of case study or as part of theory, how do you approach it? For example, the refugee crisis show. It's an international affairs issue, IR issue. Okay, India maybe it has been in news. Why it has been in news? in India?
Refugees are increasing, it's infiltrated.
कहाँ से आ रहे हैं? Yeah, Rohingya refugees. Okay. So recently, the government said that all the Rohingya refugees would be deported. So again, you can get a case or you can get a question. What are the ethical issues with regard to the refugee crisis that India is facing? How India should deal with it? Okay. So what are the policies at present? What are the policies that we have to deal with the refugees? Okay. As a policy maker, draft a refugee policy, draft an ethical refugee policy. Are you understanding? तो पेपर 2 में आएगा तो वहाँ पर you have to approach the question differently. वहाँ पर you have to state the facts. Internationally, these are conventions. Domestically, these are the laws. In paper 4, you have to write more in terms of ethics and values. So whenever you are reading any IR topic, keep your eyes, ears open. Okay, how to approach it from ethics point of view. Okay, the final thing that we are going to discuss is moral roots of India's foreign policy. So our foreign policy was Gandhi inspired and Nehru directed. Okay, what were the fundamental values of our foreign policy that we adopted after independence? First, India's role as an international peacemaker. India's role as an international peacemaker. Second, non-violence and quest for nuclear disarmament. Non-violence and quest for nuclear disarmament. Third, non-alignment and an independent foreign policy. Non-alignment and an independent foreign policy. Fourth, moral, diplomatic and economic support. Moral, diplomatic and economic support against colonialism, racialism and apartheid. Against colonialism, racialism and apartheid. And fifth, Panchayat principles. Panchayat principles. Okay, we'll discuss about these principles tomorrow. And we will complete this topic within 10 minutes. Then we will start with ethics in public and private relationship. And tomorrow we will also start with governance part. Ethics in governance, civil services, tomorrow we will start. So tomorrow class is from 2:30.